I've been to see the Prime Minister to resign as Secretary of State for Health and Social Care. I understand the enormous sacrifices that everybody in this country has made, that you have made, and those of us who make these rules have got to stick by them, and that's why I've got to resign. I want to thank people for their incredible sacrifices and what they've done. Everybody working in the NHS, across social care, everyone involved in the vaccine programme, and frankly everybody in this country who has risen to the challenges that we've seen over this past 18 months. I'm very proud of what we've done to protect the NHS at the peak, to deliver that vaccine rollout, one of the fastest in the world, and I look forward to supporting the government and the Prime Minister from the backbenches to make sure that we can get out of this pandemic. We're so close to the end, and then build back better so that this country can fulfill its potential, which is so great. And I will do that with all of my heart.
Matt Hancock today reveals the depths of his anguish over the affair which ended his marriage, describing the moment when he told his wife as the very worst conversation of my life. In his explosive pandemic diaries, serialized in today's Mail on Sunday and the Mail Plus, the former health secretary describes his terrible black dread at the prospect of his affair with Gina being revealed, and recounts the devastating implications of our feelings for each other. The Tory MP, who won plaudits and brickbats for his recent performance in ITV's I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, also writes about how then Prime Minister Boris Johnson was the kindest of confidants throughout the drama, and even filmed Mr. Hancock's resignation statement on his wobbly mobile phone. The most passionately personal sections of the diaries concern Miss Coladangelo, who was on the ITV set in Australia to greet Mr. Hancock when he emerged from the jungle. The relationship with Miss Coladangelo, a friend of since their Oxford University days who worked with him in the health department, was exposed when The Sun obtained CCTV images of the couple embracing in his offices in breach of his own rules enforcing social distancing. Mr. Hancock writes, accompanying the joy of falling in love, if you are supposed to be happily married, is the turmoil. You know, with terrible black dread, that sooner or later the relationship must be revealed and everything will come crashing down. The Suffolk MP, who had the party whip suspended for signing up to the ITV show, says that the pair knew the devastating implications of our feelings for each other, but were trying to work out the least painful way of being together. After the call from The Sun, Mr. Hancock said he knew immediately what I had to do. I needed to tell my wife, Martha, right away, because it needed to come from me and nobody else. I also knew I had to tell the children. It was going to be incredibly painful, but I couldn't hide away from them forever. They deserved to know, too. Having the health secretary for a husband or father during a global pandemic has been incredibly tough for the family, and I feel wretched. Before heading to see his family, Mr. Hancock writes, he tells Mr. Johnson, who he describes as no stranger to personal turmoil and, it turned out, the kindest of confidants in these ghastly circumstances. He was thoughtful, considered, and as supportive as he could be for everyone involved. He adds, I explained it all, that Gina and I had recently fallen in love, and fallen in love very deeply. I told him how I had known Gina for more than half of my life. We first met working together on student radio at Oxford, and I brought her into the health department to help with public communications. I told him that we had spent a huge amount of time together during the pandemic and fell in love. Foolish as it sounds, it felt completely outside my control. Mr. Johnson said that he would stand by his minister, because although Mr. Hancock had breached guidelines, he had not broken the law. Mr. Hancock writes, with those words ringing in my head, and in utter turmoil, I headed home to talk to Martha. It was, and remains, the very worst conversation of my life. Mr. Hancock went into hiding in a futile attempt to ride out the growing storm. Politically, I was increasingly isolated, he writes. I felt desperate for my family, my children and Gina's family and her children, and powerless to protect them. Worse was the knowledge that Gina and I had brought all this on them. Gina's feelings of shame and guilt were nearly overpowering her. The jokes and cartoons on social media were excruciating. We were being publicly humiliated, again and again. It is all my fault, of course. I knew I had to take responsibility. I knew in my heart that I had to resign. Mr. Hancock then travels to Chequers, the Prime Minister's country retreat, to tender his resignation, with Mr. Johnson filming his words on his mobile phone. In the end, the great machinery of the state was nowhere. It was just me and the PM, fumbling around with an iPhone. He stood on the grass, holding the phone while I said my piece. It took a few goes to get right. He nodded sympathetic encouragement so much throughout the first take that the camera waved up and down. In the end it wasn't perfect, but I was beyond caring. I had to get it out. Mr. Johnson then offered a last, characteristic piece of advice: time to dive beneath the ice cap.